Hello and welcome to another health talk. This is on a kind of a three-pronged topic of fat, meat, and oil, or more specifically, trans fats. So for decades, I think it was in either the 1960s, I think, maybe was it? Or maybe it was the 70s, I forget. But trans fats have been around for probably longer than I've been alive. And they were produced in an effort to provide a stable alternative to some of the other things that were in our diet. And I think maybe Crisco was the first company to create trans fats, and basically you partially hydrogenate oil, and that creates this solid that is stable a lot, shelf stable a lot longer. Sorry, and maybe this was the 70s after the Warren Commission's report about fat came out. Um, And just to digress for a little bit, the Warren Commission initially came out with a report that was very specific about what foods we should be avoiding. However, the food industry got its hands on it and did not appreciate the honesty and truthfulness of this report, and they put a lot of pressure on the Warren Commission to reword the results to make it vague, so that instead of specific industries being called out for producing crap foods that were killing us, it was a vague call against fat. Now, people in the public came away with this either initially or eventually, because a lot of times the news would not be specific enough to differentiate between saturated, unsaturated, and other kinds of and those kinds of fats. So people would come away with the impression that they shouldn't eat any fat. Well, your brain is largely fat and liquid, so it's very important that you do get fat in your diet. And the fat from what's in whole milk is better than what's in skim milk because of what's not in the skim milk anymore. But non-milk sorry, let me backtrack a sec. The milk that a mother produces is far superior to any kind of formulas, and always has been, despite the lies spread by Nestle and other companies. And in addition, the milk that we can normally consume now from cows, sometimes from goat and sheep and stuff, is not chemically that similar to the stuff that our mama made when we were babies, and cannot provide the same kinds of nutrients that we need, because we're not ruminants or grass-eating animals. We are humans, and we have different macronutrient and micronutrient needs than those animals do. So consuming dairy products is not good. But anyways, the Warren report initially gave very specific recommendations, avoiding processed foods, avoiding saturated fats, and trans fats. Trans fats came out later. And reducing intake of salt and oil and sugar. And all of these industries fought back and forced the Warren Commission to reword it so that it was very vague and just said, cut down on your fats. And so people eventually came to believe that all fats were bad. And all fats are not bad. So polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats are actually good for us, although there are people out there who are spreading lies about it and claiming, no, these are bad for you. They are actually good for you. Does that mean that there shouldn't be any kind of a balance? Oh, yes, there should be a balance. Should there be moderation? Yes, there should be moderation. But when you look at saturated fat, so say, for example, how much saturated fat should you be getting per day? 20 grams of saturated fat is what you should be getting per day. More than that, and you're putting yourself at risk potentially, especially if your family has a history of problems like atherosclerosis, where you get plaque build up around your heart, in your brains, and other parts. So it can lead to heart disease. It can lead to dementia, Alzheimer's, and so on and so forth. Other problems as well. So you want to stay away from large amounts of saturated fat. Unfortunately, one of my favorite foods, I guess if you can call it that, chocolate, has in the area of 60% saturated fat of all the fat that's in it. And some are higher, some are lower, but approximately 60%. So I have to really cut down on my chocolate consumption, be very careful about that to avoid, worsening my plaque problem. So that's the first part. The second part is there eventually came out that trans fats were really, really worse than saturated fats, were bad for us, super bad for us. And so a lot of companies had to remove trans fats from their recipes. But there was pushback against, I guess, the USDA or the FDA or something like that, saying, hey, we want to be able to label stuff as trans fat free, but we actually have trace amounts of or low amounts of trans fats in our food. So we would like it very much if it's less than half a gram per the serving that we define, then we don't have to list it. And so what companies can do is they can create a serving size that allows them to make it look like on the nutrition facts that there are no trans fats in their product, when in reality, if you were to use a large enough serving size, you would see that yes, it does contain trans fats. So one product that will almost inevitably contain trans fats are refined cooking oils. It doesn't matter if it's olive or corn or soy or canola or coconut, or coconut or palm or any of these other kinds. Oh my God, something's in my, sorry. It doesn't matter. The refining process uses chemicals, maybe it uses heat, and heat will result in the production of trans fats. Then if you go to a fast food restaurant where they use refined oils to cook French fries and to cook your fried chicken and all this other stuff, that process, that heating process, that cooking process, number one, produces more trans fats and saturated fats in the oil. And the more times they use the same oil without having a filtration process that removes those saturated and trans fats, the more saturated and trans fats oils you're getting in the oil, trans fats you get that are in the oil will go into your food. And so, you may assume that a restaurant starts with clean, brand new, refined oil at the start of their day, which a lot of companies don't. I used to work at some fast food restaurants, and I know that what they'll do is they will run it. Theoretically, they should run it through a filtration machine every day, either at the end of the day or at the start of the day. Probably at the start of the day, because at the end of the day it's going to be too hot to run it through the filtration machine. So they should run it through the machine at the start of the day. And then you would think that means that there won't be any fats in the oil. Well, don't forget it's refined, so therefore there are already trans fats in it. You won't see trans fats listed on the nutrition facts for any refined oils because they look at it 1 tablespoon or 2 tablespoons or 3 teaspoons, a tiny amount that allows them to avoid declaring that there are actually trans fats in their products. Depending on what the source of the oil is, there'll be more or less. Some are more likely to produce trans fats than others due to the processes that are used and also which processes are used. So, generally speaking, the filtration process that's used by these restaurants to clean their oil so they can reuse it is to remove physical things from the oil. Now, I can't say that there aren't any filtration machines that also will remove these bad fats, saturated and the trans fats, but in general, it's like a coffee filter kind of thing. So you're just removing physical impurities, little chunks of batter or whatever. little pieces of potato, little pieces of fish that have fallen off the fillet. So yeah, you get even more trans fats and saturated fats from food that has been cooked in oil. And you're just setting yourself up for heart attacks and other problems like dementia. And that's not good. If you've ever seen an image of somebody who has Alzheimer's, there's actually a huge section of their brain that's missing because of Alzheimer's. And this also happens in dementia, I believe. So should we avoid using oil in our cooking? Well, it depends. Number one, is it a refined oil or is it a virgin oil? Number two, how much saturated fat naturally occurs in that virgin oil? Number three, at what temperature are you going to cook that oil? Number four, are you going to reuse that oil? Number five, there are a bunch of other considerations. So in general, my recommendation is use modest amounts of virgin oil, and remember that high temperatures will result inevitably during the cooking process in the production of saturated and trans fats. And don't reuse the oil. Okay? Don't save it for tomorrow just because you've got like half a bottle in your pot and you're like, oh, I don't want to throw away all that oil. Throw away that oil. Or convert your car to burning oil, refined oil instead of burning gas. So yeah, it's not healthy. If you want to have some uncooked virgin oil, great. However, I would suggest, because Americans overconsume soy and corn because these are subsidized crops, that you avoid buying soy oil and corn oil and any other oil that represents or that's from a product that is highly very common in the food that you eat. Okay, so if you were like constantly chewing on peanuts and eating peanut butter, you probably shouldn't be cooking with peanut oil. And use common sense. Okay, if it's something that you're already eating a lot of in other forms, don't use that oil. Stick with virgin olive oil, virgin canola oil. If you don't mind having the flavor of some of the other stronger ones like walnut oil and stuff, sesame oil, as long as they're virgin, go ahead and use those too. But just remember, don't use high temperatures when you're cooking them. It doesn't matter. Oh, by the way, it doesn't matter. If you're going to use an air fryer and you lightly oil the stuff that you're putting into the air fryer, please keep in mind, number one, if you cook that stuff then at a high temperature, you're producing trans fats and you're also increasing the risks of other kinds of chemicals being produced in your food that are bad for you. So don't use higher temperatures. Use a lower temperature at a longer frequency, or partially cook at a lower temperature and then do the rest of the time at a higher temperature. I just recently learned about that. So, all right. Now, here is the big thing that you probably haven't heard about. So we know that, fats occur now in the refined oils. But what a lot of people aren't aware of is the fact that trans fats naturally occur in the fat of ruminant animals, cows, sheep, goats, and other animals that graze. There is an amount of trans fats larger than in most refined oils that exists in the fat of these animals that we like to eat. So if you really know, so if you know that you have a history of heart disease or other problems related to fat, you should be cutting off the fat on your meat from ruminant animals. Okay? And also keep in mind that when you cook other animals, that process of cooking is going to affect the fat in those animals and might produce more saturated fats, might produce trans fats. So your meat is not something that, is as pure as we like to think about it, especially if the animals have been raised on things like corn and soy. Ruminants are not designed to eat corn and soy. They're designed to eat grass and other kinds of leaves. So that has an impact on the macronutrient and micronutrient profile of the meat and the dairy and the eggs. So anytime you take an animal and you switch them from the diet that they're supposed to be on to a diet that's cheaper for you to give them, you're changing what their nutritional value is for you as a consumer and putting yourself potentially at risk. So be very, very, very careful about, keeping that in mind. So that's pretty much what I wanted to share with you. I hope that it makes sense. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave me questions in the comment section. Just be polite about it because, I don't have any tolerance for trolls. Thanks for watching and I hope you have a great day.